Rude employee got what she deserved after doing this to an older man. She wouldn't have clarified why she wouldn't serve him either. He didn't join the queue for 45 minutes to be treated like this. And so without a doubt he was not used to people who refused to obey his instruction or had to look at him like this. No one should ever be. She didn't seem to have any clue as to who he really was or what power he had at his fingertips. In fact, it was self-evident. So he can't wait to see her face when she finds out about it. It was a day off for Alexandria, the man of VA Carl Baker. After several 12-hour shifts, he was quite ready to relax and unwind. He'd arranged his day out already. He was going to bed, eating out, exploring the city, and wrapping up the day by sitting in front of the TV with a drink in his hand. However, situations are not always as planned. Baker woke up hopping on his bed with his dog. The sun was shining on his face and it was already time for lunch. He got ready, started pouring himself a cup of coffee, and thought about where he might have to go to have a good brunch. Decided, he jumped in his car and began to head for a restaurant he hadn't previously been to on the outskirts of town. Now was a choice he would regret afterwards. They began to look upon him in absolute disdain. It had been a long time since Baker had been confronted with some total disrespect. He usually did not get mistreated by his current career, but no one here knew who he really was. Baker walked into the restaurant and decided to join the line. His hunger began to grow as he looked at the menu on the wall. He waited in line as time passed. His choices had long been limited to 2 meals. In several aspects, Baker was wonderful, although in one way, he'd always been renowned for just being a picky eater. He was selective to say the least, so when he decided on a meal, he had great expectations that his research would finally pay off. He was convinced that it would be good enough to wait in line to justify the 45-minute wait. He was mistaken. Although it was an unusually long time waiting to place an order, Baker was indeed a patient individual. However, and pretty shortly, this statement about that trait was about to be driven far beyond the limits. By the time Baker actually arrived behind the cash register, he was starving and eager to order. However, what next happened would have sent his head spinning. Baker greeted the cashier politely, who welcomed him with an appearance strongly similar to frustration and possibly irritation. She'd been munching gum and obviously looked as if she wasn't having a good day. Even so, he insisted on smiling while ordering his meals. He did understand that life was not always rainbows and apple drops, as Baker absolutely loved to make people smile when he could. No, it was definitely not the same for this employee. Baker ordered and then was shocked to hear her tell him that his initial order was impossible to produce. He was upset, but there were still some other choices available. He switched to his second option, which was unavailable once again. Bewildered, he glanced at the list and asked the restaurant for the only other meal he wanted. She began to roll her eyes and repeated her previous reply. It has irritated Baker now. He was actually spending so much time queuing up for food highlighted in chalk under today's special offers. If he'd known that these meals weren't available, he wouldn't have stood in line, and the situation wasn't helped by her implacably poor attitude. He also hindered his dissatisfaction and began to ask if there was anything else not on the list. Once again, she began to roll her eyes and started looking at him disapprovingly, as if to claim telepathically that perhaps the question was stupid. Now, alongside their misleading advertising, her conduct was just too much. He had plenty to say. Before he could even open his mouth, however, it was as though she was reading his thoughts. "Listen, mister, if you're not gonna order, you need to leave," she snarled. Baker thought to himself, that's it. He stayed in place and then said nonchalantly, "Can I speak to your manager?" Without a word, she walks to the side, yelling into the back. Then she returns her empty stare to Baker and a lady comes out to answer her call. She starts looking at Baker and the people queuing behind him. "What's the problem here, sir? You're holding up the people behind you." Baker saw where the worker's behavior came from. This wasn't really going to be interesting and fun, he realized. He ignored the demeaning accusation that he was the reason for such ridiculous lines and tried to explain to her what had actually happened and how the manager was supposed to fix the issue he noticed in her establishment. Her remark was surprising. After that, a female cook happened to come to the register to notify the manager, pointing to Baker, "You better pull me off the line because I'm not serving him." He decided to wait for the manager to take action, but she began laughing. Baker kept his cool and informed them respectfully to manage their customers better, or there would indeed be consequences. As Baker anticipated, she didn't want to listen to his suggestion. "I understand that things didn't go your way today, sir, but that's life. Now if you could kindly remove yourself from my establishment. I don't serve men like you," she scoffed. "Men like me?" Baker responded incredulously. What did she mean by men like him? Baker had enough. He wasn't playing Mr. Nice Guy anymore. He reaffirmed his goal by talking with her, attempting to speak with greater authority, and assured her that he was saying things for her own good. Now he asked her to explain what she meant by men like him, but what she did next in his thoughts will eventually resolve any doubts about retaliation. She had been cold-faced and arrogant. "I don't need to explain what I meant to anyone. Get on out now before you cause a scene," she said. He wasn't used to folks refusing to obey this kind of order, and he was definitely not used to others looking down on him. She didn't seem to have any clue as to who he really was or even what power he had at his fingertips. It was obvious. He often thought strolling around without his uniform was a great way to see what people were really like, and it succeeded in proving this. It really was perfectly evident to Baker that she wasn't going to talk to him like an older person. He felt totally mistreated and mocked as bystanders started to notice. He began to look around at the eyes and ears that paid interest to him. When he realized that almost everyone in the restaurant started to look at him, his face turned red. He didn't even know anyone there, but he started wondering if some of the customers identified him. They certainly wouldn't even assume that a restaurant would be bold enough to address him like this if they did. Without anything more to discuss, Baker decided to leave the restaurant. He was disappointed, angry, and embarrassed by their behavior, actions he couldn't let go unpunished. He would overlook the disturbing beginning of his day in uniform that indicates addressing and beginning serving people with respect and coming back to terms with this terrible experience tomorrow during normal working hours. How are they then going to respond? The following day, Baker threw on his police chief's attire and went back to work. He had so many things to work on. He was worried, but he had promised himself to call the restaurant and reveal his face. He just can't sit back and see them in their boots trembling. Baker decided to stop by on his journey back from some kind of call-out in the restaurant's area. Lucky to find parking, he pulled up his cruiser and pushed through the doorways. His face looked strict. The aura of his appearance loaded the whole restaurant. Baker was indeed a broad, big guy, and he seemed to embody power with his uniform on. They were all looking at him now for the best reasons. He was approached with a smiling face and with honor. Even the expressions of all the staff and the person at the checkout, who was somewhat now more attentive, suddenly lightened up. She greeted him with a smiling face that began to fade once she had identified him gradually. Dumping formalities, he requested a manager. The cashier appealed to the manager hesitantly. That said, at this moment she began to walk to the back kitchen door and started yelling. Now she seemed to be mindful of her manners. Baker stood with one hand resting on his waist belt and the other carrying a radio device. For obvious reasons, he played the part. Especially as his radio call bleeped with officer notifications, he waited for her to show up. At the moment, though, a different manager was working. She was, however, quite upset by what Baker told her and immediately apologized. She also pledged to publish an internal review of her co-workers' doings. After bystanders who'd been there report about the officer's mismanagement, the story managed to reach social networking sites briefly. The restaurant now had to come out with a statement. A representative for the restaurant didn't attempt to deny the allegations when asking more about the officer's disturbing treatment. She told the media that everything had actually happened as Baker had described. The restaurant was shocked that a law enforcement officer had been shown disrespect and agreed to look more into the problem. But would it really be enough? One enraged reader decided to write, "I don't know why the offended officer doesn't sue for $150,000. This is no different than the Oregon's bakery refusing to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. Discrimination is discrimination." Whereas another took a more rational view, saying, "We're working with the appropriate authorities and local police association representatives to get to the bottom of and resolve this matter as quickly as possible. We've made efforts to reach out to the police officer involved but have not yet spoken with him. We'll continue to look into the situation and will take appropriate actions after this review." This story immediately began doing all cycles on Twitter and Facebook, to the uproar of thousands of users, even after the establishment's urge to save face. I don't know why the offended officer doesn't sue for $150,000. And while the restaurant was praised by Representative Pete Feltham of the Alexandria Police Unit for its coordination and quick apology, the damage was already done when the restaurant rushed outside to place banners trying to support police officers. Instead of intensifying the conflict, he disconnected and believed that Baker handled the situation perfectly. However, he said he was shocked that an event like this occurred in Alexandria because the police force usually has a fantastic relationship with citizens and local businesses. None of the statements by Feltham did anything to pacify the anger of the citizens. Thousands of comments were left on the restaurant's Facebook page, grumpily notifying them that they were beginning to be boycotted completely and encouraging other customers to do it too. And there was even debate on social media among people regarding stealing from the restaurant after the incident. Baker decided to make his stance on this simple instead. He said that he's not really in favor of cancel culture due to this, and neither does he want to see illegal behavior rise in the restaurant. He also discourages anyone from trying to stop supporting it. Take the high road, he said. The actions of a few do not equate to the actions of many. Two wrongs after therefore don't make a right. In response to the immense number of criticisms, the restaurant focused its efforts on its promise. As per the Washington Post, just under a week after, they made an official statement. The source said, in a statement the company said that the views and actions of these individuals were inexcusable and do not reflect those of the company and of the rest of the staff at the Duke Street location. The establishment said, "We have concluded the two team members in question acted inappropriately and we immediately terminated their employment." Continuing, "We have the utmost respect for law enforcement officials and value the relationship we've built with the local Alexandria Police Department over the years.